2022-23 school year. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Margie Rafferty-Crichon. I've had the privilege to be the PIC chairperson for years now. It's good to see some familiar faces, some new faces. Just a real quick review of what your responsibilities are as a PIC member. What we typically ask you to do is to be sure to let parents know in your school that the meeting is about to occur. See if you can canvass them for any concerns or issues that they'd like to have brought to the administration. As you know, there's chain of command, but sometimes there are things outside of that where a parent may want to have a specific concern addressed. So you can feel free to bring that to me. I will then give it to the administration, and if we can handle it outside of the meeting, we will. If we can handle it as a meeting agenda item, we will do that. And then ultimately what you'll need to do is you'll need to go back to your parent organizations at the board meeting that's the most recent to this meeting, and just talk to them about everything that was covered here. If there were any resources shared, we ask you that you share those on the Facebook page. Like for instance, our Middletown Friends of Diverse Learners always have upcoming meetings. They have flyers. We always ask you to disseminate those flyers. I've been getting flyers from the library for a while now that I've asked you to also share on your Facebook pages for your parents. So I guess it's just basically you're the conduit of information from this group out to your parent group at both the meetings and at your Facebook pages. And always, if you have any concerns or questions or problems about anything that goes on, if you want more information, clarification, please always email me. I will always get back to you in some form or another, whether it's an answer from the administration or help from me. And that's pretty much it. I guess just to get started, why don't we just go around the room very quickly and just tell me your name and your school. And then, of course, if the administration wouldn't mind introducing themselves as well for our newbies who may not know who you are. Okay, so let's start over there.
My name is Rebecca Silverman, and I'm at Village Elementary.
I'm Heather Safford. I'm the parent co-leader of Middletown Diverse Learners, and my son is here at Bayshore.
Hi, Natalie Petrillo. We're with New Monmouth Elementary School.
Hi, this is Pagano, New Monmouth.
Hi, Margaret Miori, Nutswamp Elementary.
Jennifer Bories, Nutswamp.
Okay, and also in the back too, we have someone at the back table who I happen not to know. Oh, Christy, wait, no, it's Christy.
I'm Christine Stockhouse, and I'm Middletown High School North.
Tara Bello. I'm here for Lakecroft. I also have a daughter at Tufts.
Samantha Cutler. My kids are at Harmony.
Patricia Cartier, Central Office.
Allison Santa, Bayshore, and I also have a student in South and one in Madison.
Kristen Rooney, I'm here for Navasink, and I also have a student at Bayshore.
I'm Edie Waltz. I'm representing Leonardo, but I also have a son at Bayshore.
I'm Catherine Kogan. I'm from Lincroft Elementary.
Holly Rolfe, and I'm here for Thompson and also have kids in Lincroft.
Rachel Kanopka, here for Thompson, have two daughters at South also.
Denise Thompson, I have a freshman and a senior at South.
Sarah Pampelonia, Fairview.
And in the back?
Todd Curtis, I'm the new principal at Bayshore.
Good morning, Kevin Cullen, principal of High School North, and thank you for participating on PIC.
Frank Capone, board president. I have way too many kids to go to the schools.
Good morning, everyone. Cavernella, assistant superintendent.
Jessica Alphone, assistant superintendent.
I'm Meg Young, director of school counseling and mental health services.
Matt Kirkpatrick, assistant superintendent. I did want to introduce Chris Rotolo as well. He deserves an introduction. He's in charge of our website. And apparently he gets applause.
Yes. Good morning, Devin Orozco, district director of curriculum.
Good morning, John Cardigan, district director of assessment, evaluation, and special programs.
And Mr. Smith.
Oh, I thought you were clapping for me when I walked in. I was introduced already. My name is Pete Smith. I'm the principal of Leonardo Grade School. Good morning, everybody.
And one last note of order, just so you know, I appreciate the fact that everybody introduced themselves as their school rep as well as introduced their children, but we do ask that when you couch your concerns to the group, that you don't couch it as an individual need based on your own children. I know that some of you will have concerns and you'll start out the thought with, well, I have a son at Bayshore, or I have a daughter at North, and this is what's happening. So if you could maybe back that up a little bit and maybe bring it more to the table as a general issue or concern with whatever's going on in your particular school, we'd really appreciate it. Okay, and we'll get started with the meeting. Mr. Kirkpatrick, back
Obviously, we've done a great deal of work in the area of mental health in our district and social emotional learning in the last 12 to 18 months, really, and we're continuing to expand our services. We really have some exciting initiatives that are coming down the line, and Dr. Young is going to share some of those ideas and plans with you today. We'd be happy to take questions afterwards. Without going into great detail, obviously the district suffered a great loss earlier in the year with one of our students, and it has shown a little bit of a brighter light on our practices. We are confident that what we currently implement is our effective practices in supporting our students, but as always, we're always looking to improve what we deliver to our students, and we would love to hear your feedback after Dr. Young's presentation. We appreciate some of the feedback that we've gotten. Some of you have emailed us over the last few weeks with some concerns and questions, and we are always here for you to field those concerns, and if you want to contact us, you can always do that in private if you want to ask your questions privately. But right now, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Young.
Please. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. As Mr. Kirkpatrick said, my name is Meg Young. I'm the Director of School Counseling and Mental Health Services for the district. Just a little background, I've worked in the district for about 18 years as a school psychologist. So I've worked at Middletown High School South and then for about 15 years at Thorne Middle School. So I have a pretty long history in the district and have seen many of the services and programs that we've had around for a long time. I've seen them since their inception in the district several years ago and how they've developed over time, and also where we need to continue to go, as Mr. Kirkpatrick said. So Chris, you can go to the next slide. So I wanted to start by just talking a little bit about our counseling staff. Middletown employs about 65 mental health professionals. They are throughout all of our buildings. In the high schools, we have school counselors or guidance counselors. There are 7 in each high school. Each high school also has a student assistance counselor, as well as school psychologists and school social workers as part of the child study team. The middle schools also all have a student assistance counselor. They all have guidance counselors. There are 3 at Bayshore, 3 at Thorne, and 4 at Thompson. And they also have school psychologists and school social workers as part of their child study teams. In the elementary schools, we do something a little bit different. We have professionals who work under the title of SBSS, or Social Behavior Support Specialist. They are all credentialed by the state DOE as school psychologists or school social workers. They just operate under that title that's kind of unique to Middletown. And then we also have school psychologists and school social workers who work as part of the child study team in all of our elementary buildings as well. So I want to just talk a little bit about the continuum of social emotional well-being to start, because when I get into the services that we have and the programs we have, there are different services and programs that target different needs that students might have. So when we talk about social emotional learning, or SEL, we're talking about skill instruction in core competencies. So social emotional learning revolves around the paradigm that there are core skills that students can learn and benchmarks to measure how they are progressing in learning those skills that will help them be a more socially and emotionally competent individual. So this year we've started our Positive Action Program, which is a comprehensive K-12 SEL program, and I'll talk more about other positive action, but also other SEL opportunities that we have in our schools. When we're talking about social emotional learning, we're really targeting all students. So we really want all students to be exposed to the skills that are specific to social emotional learning, those core competencies, and we really want to see all students develop with these skills. So there are curriculum and activities that nurture the skill development and acquisition, but we also want to see those skills generalized and integrated out into curricular activities, extracurricular activities, even unstructured periods of the student's day, such as lunch or recess, those types of things. When we talk about mental health, we're starting to move into a different area. These areas are not mutually exclusive, but they're also not the same. So in mental health, we're really looking at a continuum of indicators that may interfere with somebody's functional capacity or how they're functioning in their activities of daily living, whatever those may be. We're generally talking about a target population of identified students. There's screening, diagnosis, treatment planning involved that is aimed at reducing symptoms and increasing functional capacity. You definitely want to be working with someone who uses evidence-based treatment because there's a clinical component involved. And what we're trying to do is reduce barriers so that people can be at their optimal functional capacity. So I just wanted to kind of share this information when we talk about different services, because not every service in terms of mental health will be applicable to every single student. However, services related to social emotional learning will be applicable to every student. Okay, Chris, next slide. So when we talk about our framework of resources, we really want to look at comprehensive mental health programming in schools. So some of you may be familiar with the traditional triangle that we use in school of tiered services, the base being universal services, so these are services that are applicable to all students, Tier 2 being targeted services, and then Tier 3 being the most intensive or individualized services. And the triangle is inverted when we talk about services that are applicable in the community or available in the community. So in the community, we generally see less Tier 1 type services. The community mostly is where you're going to see, in terms of mental health programming, you're going to see more Tier 3 or individualized and intensive services in the community. So I think it's just helpful to be aware of this framework as we talk about students' needs. There are programs that will be available in school depending on students' needs, and dependent on the need, there will be programs that we have to refer to that are more community-based. Next slide, Chris. So this slide is really an overview of a lot of things we have in Middletown. It's not a completely exhaustive list, but I tried to hit all of the big areas of programming that we have, and then some examples of things that our district staff do. I'm going to review the chart vertically, just so that you can see things that are provided by each different lead agency. I think that is the best way to kind of understand it. So in Tier 1, these are services, again, applicable to all students in the district. So we have Positive Action, which, like I said, is our comprehensive K-12 social emotional learning program that we just implemented this year. The basis of Positive Action is helping students to understand the thought, action, feeling cycle. That every one of us have that cycle represented in our cognitive abilities, and that when we can start to raise students' awareness of their thoughts, whether they're positive or negative, we can start to teach them how their thoughts are connected to how they act and the decisions that they make, and how that is connected to how they feel about themselves and the decisions they're making in their life. And that as we raise that awareness for students, they can become more intentional in how they think and how they act, resulting in ultimately feeling better. We do other things related to Tier 1. We have our Lifeline Suicide Prevention Program, which we started in the district in around 2014, 2015. Our staff will be retrained on that program this year. That is implemented through our health curriculum in grades 5, 9, and 12. We have restorative practices, which are collaborations between administrators, teachers, and counselors when a student has had a disciplinary infraction, so that the end result is less punitive, more restorative in helping the student learn from those experiences. We have a variety of awareness and prevention programming. Last week was Respect Week, so I'm sure many of you who have elementary and middle school students, even high school students, you saw the different things that schools were doing for Respect Week to raise awareness and prevention programming. We have character education programs and acknowledgement systems in our buildings. So these are things like Caught Doing Good. I know Thorne has the PRIDE acronym that they use for their character education. Many other buildings have things similar. Of course, we have professional development for our staff so that our staff can be knowledgeable and trained on the best evidence-based practices currently. And then we have our counseling staff. So I had just mentioned some of our counseling staff throughout the buildings. Chris, if you could just click on this link. I just want to show you a little bit. We collect data on our counseling staff throughout the district so that we can see the different things. Oop, that's the wrong link. Was it this link? Yes, here we go. So we can see what the counseling staff is actually providing in terms of service provision. So this is at the elementary level. These are different activities that counselors may be engaged in throughout their day. So they include things like a direct service to students. So this is some type of face-to-face meeting with students, whether it's individually, small group, in a classroom, providing a lesson. And then we also have the many activities that counselors engage in that are considered indirect service to students. So they benefit the student, but they're not face-to-face with the student for that activity. So that might be a teacher or staff consultation, an administrative consultation, a multidisciplinary team meeting, a teacher or staff training, consultation with a private provider. So you can see, if you slide up to this pie chart, Chris, you can see at the elementary level, we have a lot of direct service with students, but we also have a significant amount of adult consultation from our counselor staff. And you want to see that, especially at the elementary level, because a lot of our students are still really dependent on the adults in their life to get their needs met. So you do want the counselors interacting a lot with the adults, whether it's teachers, parents, administrators, or private providers. You can keep scrolling, Chris. We'll get to the middle school. The middle school, same types of activities, but as you can see, you start to get into a much higher level of direct service. Those of you who have middle schoolers know middle schoolers are starting to really want to be independent. They want to try and take care of their needs themselves. Some middle schoolers really like to go to meet their counselors individually or in a small group. That becomes like sort of the cool thing to do sometimes in middle schools, leave class to go to the guidance office. So you start to see more levels of individual contact. And then at the high school level, we have the most level of individual service. So if you scroll all the way down, you can see counselors at the high school level spend more than half of their time in their professional activities meeting with students directly, whether it's individual, small group, or classroom lessons. All right, Chris, you can go back to the presentation. Tier 2. So in the school, there's a variety of things that district staff can do that would be considered at the Tier 2 level. So these are things like check-in systems with students. So we have students throughout the district who need that kind of daily contact with their counselor. They'll check in the morning, check out in the afternoon, just so they're just quick touch base moments with counselors. We have several schools in the district have mentoring programs where students are paired with adults that aren't necessarily one of their teachers that they can just have contact with throughout the day. We have targeted skill and support groups, short-term counseling, group counseling, and behavioral supports. And then in terms of what the district offers for Tier 3, the closest thing to Tier 3 services at the district level would be our behavior disabilities classrooms, or students who have a really involved, in-depth functional behavior assessment and behavior intervention plan. Effective School Solutions is one of our main collaborating partners for mental health services. So things that they provide to the district at the Tier 1 level, meaning again, available to everyone, is we do a parenting series with them. We did 2 parent nights last spring. We have a parent night coming up November 2nd, which will be on, it's entitled Having Hope, Suicide Prevention for Parents. We'll also be having a presentation December 1st on depression and anxiety in children and adolescents. We also are partnering with Effective School Solutions on rolling out a universal screener. So this will be a brief screening assessment that will be available to students with active consent from the parents that will allow us to just screen children for any areas of concern related to their mental health needs. And then there will be a whole process and procedure for how we will follow up on those findings. So we are in the process of developing that now. And then of course ESS provides, again, a lot of professional development for our staff in various forms. ESS provides our Tier 2 counseling. So Chris, if you could just click on this link. So Tier 2 counseling is a brief model of counseling. It's 6 to 8 weeks of clinical therapy. Now, being that it's a brief model, it's intended for students with mild to moderate symptom presentation who don't meet any exclusionary criteria. So some exclusionary criteria might be things like the student already has a mental health provider in the community that they see. We don't want to duplicate services, so that wouldn't be an appropriate referral. The student has beyond moderate symptom presentation. That wouldn't be an appropriate referral because this type of service is not designed for students with beyond to moderate symptom presentation. And there are a few other criteria. So we have ESS clinicians in all of our buildings at this point available for Tier 2 service. For the month of September, we had 35 referrals, and you can kind of see the breakdown by level of who was referred. We typically always see the greatest referral rate at the high school level. Again, those students generally are just more open and presenting with talking about their symptoms that they're experiencing, so they tend to be able to access the services more readily. Chris, if you could just scroll down a little bit. And you could just see for the 35 referrals that we had for the month of September, you can just kind of see the breakdown of students who are currently enrolled, have an intake pending. Sometimes we have students that are referred to Tier 2 and they get to the assessment, and based on whatever is revealed in the assessment process, it's determined that they actually need a higher level of care. And the Tier 2 clinician will work with the family to do what we call a warm handoff to whatever that clinical care is in the community. And then we have some students who the parents declined the services. They just didn't want to do the assessment, or they didn't want to do the services in school. Okay, you can go back, thank you. And then for Tier 3, through Effective School Solutions, we have our Bridges self-contained program at the high school level. We also have an autism spectrum dual diagnosis program at High School North. And then we have wraparound support at both High School North, High School South, and Thorne Middle School. So these are services for students who are in a general education schedule, but they need more clinical support throughout the week. So they meet more frequently with their clinician. YMCA is another major collaborating partner. So in the Tier 1 level, where it's available to all students, they offer before and after care services to students. They have their Family Success Center, which is located right here in Leonardo. And they also offer our staff a tremendous amount of professional development opportunities throughout the year. We also partner with them to offer school-linked clinical care, both therapy and psychiatric care at the Tier 2 and Tier 3 level in all of our buildings. So the reason why it's at the Tier 2 and Tier 3 level for YMCA is they are a community-based care organization. They just license space in all of our buildings to be able to provide that care. So it's funded through parents' insurance. They bill through insurance. Their clinicians just come to the school during the day to provide that service for our students. If families are more comfortable, or it's better for your schedule, they also can provide care at their Mattawan office. And then other organizations that we partner with, the Municipal Alliance offers programming for our students. We will be bringing in teen mental health first aid for cohorts of students at both high schools. The Mental Health Association offers a tremendous amount of opportunities for programming and professional development for us. Sandy Hook Promise, we are rolling out in all of our elementary schools and all of our middle schools. We did this pre-COVID, and now that we're back in school full-time, we are starting to re-up those programs. So at the elementary level, the program is Say Hello. So it really talks to students about a lot of those social emotional learning components of just initiating contact with people, being friendly with people, saying hello to people. And then the middle school program is more based on the idea of Say Something. It's actually called Say Something. And it's the idea of if you see something or hear something that makes you feel uncomfortable or concerned in any way, know who the adults are that you can go to get help or to alert them that something might be off. And then Family-Based Services is a parent advocacy group that we work with in different ways to help connect families to support services. At the tier 2 level, we have private providers in the community. We maintain a really extensive list of providers, and we try and keep that as up to date as possible in terms of who's accepting new clients, who takes what type of insurance. Unfortunately, those things change all the time, so sometimes we might have a counselor give you a referral somewhere and it doesn't work out, but we try and keep that list as accurate and up to date as possible. We also have the Family Crisis Intervention Unit, which is an arm of the Mental Health Association that are able to get involved with families who have students 10 years or older, whose students are displaying increasing behavioral needs, and the families are struggling to work to get the child's behavioral needs adequately met. We also frequently refer to Perform Care, which is the state administrative agency that oversees mental health, in-home mental health services for students throughout the state of New Jersey. The vendor for Monmouth County is Monmouth Cares. And then at the tier 3 level, again, we work with private providers. There are also IOP and PHP, which are intensive outpatient or partial care programs that we work with throughout the county. Mobile Response, which is operated through CPC right here at Red Bank, and then referrals for psychiatric care. And then there are two things that we do in district that really don't fit into the tier model but are related to mental health. So that is our threat assessment process. So every building has a threat assessment team. So Chris, if you can click on this link. What the threat assessment team does is they take any concern that is brought to their attention in terms of a student who has expressed any verbal, written, or gestural indication that they plan to harm themselves, harm someone else, or a threat to the building at large. So we have teams in every building who conduct those assessments. They're unfortunately happen on a pretty regular basis. For the month of September, we had about 40 assessments. And this is kind of the breakdown of what those assessments look like. The majority of the threats that we encounter are students who are having some type of suicidal ideation. But frequently we also have students who have, either said something or written something that indicates a potential threat to someone else. And then Chris, if you could slide to the next one. In terms of the outcome of our assessment, fortunately, the majority of our assessments result in what we call no risk, no referral. Meaning the student said or did something, but they didn't actually intend, they didn't mean that they were going to hurt themselves or someone else. Frequently, this will happen at the elementary level where a student will say something to a peer like, don't do that or I'm going to kill you, right? And our staff is pretty well trained that that level of language needs to be escalated up the chain of command for proper assessment. Because even though we might know the student didn't mean it, we really want to just make sure that we know what's going on with that student, and it's also an opportunity to teach them, in those situations to use better language. About half of our students result in some level of risk. So whether that's a fit to return, which means that the student is not in imminent risk of harming themselves, but we do have elevated levels of concern about their risk. So those students are required to be picked up from school, and they will have a screening within 24 hours through ESS for clearance to return to school. And then we do have a portion of our students where we consider them at imminent risk, meaning we think there's a pretty immediate risk to their safety, and those students are required to go immediately to the hospital emergency room for a higher level of screening. Okay, Chris, you can go back to the... And then we have our traumatic event response team. So this is a team of district professionals who are activated in the result of some type of traumatic loss in the district. So we have about 35 to 40 members of our counseling staff who are members of this team. This team is really invaluable in the event that there is a traumatic event in the district because they are willing and able to respond immediately, and since they're district professionals, they usually know the students involved when we're responding to a building for some type of response. So this group does training throughout the year. They're trained in psychological first aid, skills for psychological recovery, so that when they respond to an event, they can work hand in hand with the TLC and the Mental Health Association to really provide the students with the different levels of care that they might need. Okay, so ways that you can access these services, our staff is continuously trained in different ways to identify students and assess what they need and then follow the proper procedures for referral. If you at any point have a concern about your own child or you're talking with your buildings and people have concerns about their children, the best way to access any of these services is really through a counselor at your child's school. So whether it's elementary and you're going through the SBSS or a case manager, or at the middle or high school, you can also go through the SAC or a guidance counselor. And then this is just a list of some of the community collaborations and connections that we have. So I've talked about Effective School Solutions, the Community YMCA, the Mental Health Association, which is also the association that does all our training regarding lifelines and suicide prevention. Hackensack Meridian and Robert Wood Johnson are the local hospital ER crisis centers. Monmouth Medical also operates PES, which is the pediatric emergency screening where that is mobile. So they can come to you, they can come to the school, or they can come to your home if a student is in crisis. The Traumatic Loss Coalition, which is a volunteer organization run through the YMCA of clinicians throughout the county who will respond to your district in the event of a traumatic loss, and they help guide our response process. Kayak, which is a group of really representatives from all of these agencies and then some that coordinate and plan professional development opportunities. They look at needs throughout the county and identify how to program around those needs. The Municipal Alliance and CPC Behavioral Healthcare I've talked about, private providers, and then of course we have a consulting psychiatrist that the district consults with. Next slide. Resources for parents. This is a really, area that we've been really focused on in the last couple of months. So we have very targeted resources on the website. There used to be a really expansive list of resources that, quite frankly, at times, if you were looking for something specific, it might be a little overwhelming to try and read through all of those resources to find what you were looking for. So we've been trying to really pare it down to resources that are relevant and timely and specific to certain needs that parents might have. There's a section of the newsletter that comes out weekly that is related to school and community mental health, and we try and put resources in there, whether it's just general information for parents to have, or if there's a training or a resource available locally, we'll try and push it out that way. Like I talked about, we have 2 parenting workshops coming up with ESS that will be this fall and winter. Suicide prevention and depression and anxiety in adolescents. There will also be 2 additional workshops for parents coming in the spring, and we'll certainly be putting out flyers and pushing out that information as we get closer. We are also in the process of planning a comprehensive program for student athletes, and there will be a parent component to that program. We are partnering with a local psychologist who does training for student athletes and coaches and parents on the specific mental health needs of athletes and different factors that parents and coaches need to be aware of. So that will be coming in the next few months. And then also the district will be rolling out a program called Stop It Solutions, Help Me platform. So this platform has a number of key features that we think will be really helpful for the community. One is there's an anonymous reporting system. So any parent who has the app on their phone or their iPad, or any student who has a phone who has the app, will be able to report anything of concern anonymously. There's a feature that allows the district to communicate back with the reporter anonymously to get more information so that we can vet the concern and make sure that it's funneled to the appropriate building to make sure that that student of concern is okay. There's also a way to connect directly to the National Crisis Hotline. So anyone who has the app can just click the button on their phone and they will be connected directly with the National Crisis Hotline, which is a 24/7, 365 service for students who are students, adults, anyone who's feeling any level of risk or crisis. And then it also has a community resources button. So this allows us to program right into the app all of the resources available in our community and surrounding communities based on area of concern. So this might be resources related to food insecurity, resources related to housing, resources related to transportation, resources related to tutoring. It could be anything. This is particularly useful for some of those needs that families might have that they don't feel comfortable bringing to the attention of anyone at school, but they really don't know where else to go to get support and to get connected to a resource that could help them. So we will be able to program into the app all of the resources that are available locally so that families will just have that literally at their fingertips should they encounter a need. So that we're hoping to roll that out later this fall, early this winter. And then this is just kind of an overview of some of the things we have planned for the remainder of this year. So continuing at all times, like Mr. Kirkpatrick said earlier, to review all of our programs, all of our resources, all of our supports, look at what's working for us, what's not working, and what we can do to improve. We will be offering, in conjunction with the Mental Health Association, some grief groups at Middletown High School North that will be starting shortly, that will go over the next couple of weeks. We've put up 988 signage in all of our buildings. For those of you who don't know, 988 is the crisis text line. Anyone can text that from their cell phone at any time, and you'll be directly connected with a crisis clinician, and that's connected to the national hotline. We've been in collaboration with Effective School Solutions, really flexing our use of our Tier 2 counselors to really try and meet the needs of our different buildings. In the month of September, as you can imagine, we had a huge demand at both high schools, but predominantly at Middletown High School North, for clinicians to be accessible to students. So we were able to pull some of our clinicians that work at different levels that weren't as busy and use them at the high school level. And we had the Mental Health Association had resource tables at all of our back to school nights. They were also staffed by Mental Health Association clinicians for at least all the secondary programs and maybe some of the elementary programs. From fall moving into winter, like I just talked about, we are working on Stop It Solutions and rolling out that program. We are developing the cohorts for teen mental health first aid, which will happen at both high schools, and that will be run through the Municipal Alliance and the Mental Health Association. Our ESS parenting nights, our student athlete program, and we are exploring a collaboration with the Pediatric Psychiatric Collaborative. This is a new initiative in New Jersey to connect pediatricians and psychiatrists with school nurses so that if students are experiencing some type of need and the family in conjunction with their pediatrician believes that the child might need some type of psychiatric care or assessment or treatment, the collaborative would help make that connection. Some of you may know appointments with pediatric psychiatrists can take months right now to get, and a lot of times when a family is in need of that service, they really need it immediately. They can't wait 3, 4, 5 months for an appointment. So this venture is an attempt to more immediately connect pediatricians with psychiatric providers so that families in need can access those services more readily. In the spring, we will, like I said, we will be talking about more presentations with Effective School Solutions. We are also planning on having a mental health night, probably in May. That's Mental Health Awareness Month. So that will involve a presentation by Effective School Solutions, again, a review of all of our programming, and also kind of like a vendor fair where all of these agencies I've talked about and probably additional agencies will be represented, so parents can connect directly with different agencies and organizations and hear from them about what services they provide. We will also be continuing our student athlete program and additional staff professional development, and then continuing to plan for the upcoming school year. updating our threat assessment procedures. The state just passed legislation that will update the way schools operate related to threat assessments and threat assessment teams. So we're in the process of getting all of our counseling staff and administrators trained on the new state model so that we are ready for rollout for next school year. And then always long-term looking at our staffing needs related to programs and resource needs. Next slide. And that's it. Thank you. Any questions?
I just, real quick before we take questions, I want to just say that for those of you who don't know, Dr. Young's position is a new position. And I want to commend Mrs. Walker and the Board of Education for identifying the need and having a vision and understanding that this is an area that we really need further oversight, collection of data, and support for our students and our counselors. So Dr. Young's existence in this role has really allowed us to pay the appropriate attention to this area. This is not a position that many districts in the state of New Jersey have right now. So we're lucky as a district to have someone that's overseeing our counselors and supporting our students. Sorry, Dr. Young.
That's okay. Some questions?
Hi. You mentioned there's a new program, I think you called it Positive Action, that's rolled out. How is that disseminated in the schools?
So it's counselor delivered. So the counselors, and it looks a little bit different in every building, but in general, the counselors are working with the teachers to schedule times to go into the classrooms and deliver the lessons. There are a variety of lessons available in the program, but this summer we spent some time writing a curriculum so that the counselors know what lessons they're targeting for each social emotional competency. So there's 5 main competencies identified, which are self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, responsible decision-making, and relationship skills. And then there's benchmarks associated with each competency level, and they're grade banded, like K to 2, 3 to 5, 6 to 8, and 9 to 12. So counselors are working in collaboration with teachers, time to go into their classrooms, push in and deliver this curriculum in the classroom. So their lessons, usually about 15 to 20 minutes in length, and the teachers remain in the classroom so that they can reinforce the language of the lessons for the students throughout the week or till the next time that the counselor comes back to the class.
So at Navesink, we started the year, we still don't have an SPSS, so is this gonna catch up for us? Like, has this already started?
So buildings are in different places with it. It's pretty much rolling in all of the buildings now. Middletown North is actually kicking off today because they got postponed a little bit. But it's pretty much up and rolling in all the buildings. Totally aware that the SPSS isn't in place at Navesink yet. So when that person arrives at the end of this month, I'll be working really closely with them and Mr. Herbert to figure out where's the most appropriate place to start and then how to plan out the rest of the year so that the Navesink students also get the benefit of the program this year.
I wanted to ask a little bit about the threat assessment, specifically the numbers for September. So if it was 40 kids were referred in, and of that, about a quarter of them, it seemed like, based on the pie chart, were deemed to be imminent risk and were sent to the ER. That's 10 kids in 1 month, which scares me. And I'm just wondering, how is that comparative to the past in Middletown? And I know COVID messed up the metrics, but even pre-COVID, were we seeing that level of suicidal kids? And then what sort of information have you been able to gather about what's causing these kids to get to that point? Is it bullying? Is it overwhelmed with school pressure? Is it sports? Is it like, how do we identify the causes and then try to, as a community, address those better before those kids reach that point?
Great question. So whenever there is a completed suicide, you always anticipate there being a significant increase in risk in any student who's been exposed. So that would really be any student in Middletown. And now, unfortunately, with social media, exposure actually reaches many more students than it did previously. So we fully anticipated seeing a spike in our numbers related to threat assessment, specifically related to imminent risk, because students were directly exposed. In terms of causal factors, that is much more difficult because it is never one singular thing. There is always a combination of things that are causing students to move in that direction towards suicidal ideation. Usually it's things, there are a lot of times a baseline like mental health concern happening for the student, treated or untreated. Sometimes we see students who are in treatment and they are experiencing a change in medication or an increase or a decrease in medication, and those changes put them in a more vulnerable situation. Sometimes there is an element of bullying or just relational aggression, meanness going on, and students are feeling left out, excluded, so that could be happening. There could be issues in terms of breakups, whether they're romantic breakups or friendship breakups. There could be family dynamics at play. There's usually a multitude of issues going on for students. So, you know, it's hard to say it's one thing, and this is how we're going to target that one thing, because unfortunately, it's many, many things. And that's why suicide prevention efforts are really more targeted at teaching everyone about warning signs and risk factors, and most importantly, teaching people about reducing stigma, so that if you ever hear someone say something or make a gesture or write something, knowing where you can go to get help for that person immediately. Because I think, you know, unfortunately, a lot of times we hear things or see things and we think they're not serious, or someone else will handle it. Especially, I think kids think that sometimes, and that can be, you know, lead to really tragic outcomes. So we're trying to change that mindset for people.
And that Stop It Act is kind of directly responsive to that. So kids have a way, have a mechanism to communicate to the district, I'm worried about my friend, without having to worry about
or you.
Battle. Yes,
you as a parent, you can say, I was at a football game and I overheard this conversation and it concerned me and I didn't know who to tell. So now I'm reporting it. And it gives us the opportunity to text back with you or with a student and say, can you give me more details? Did you catch anyone's name? When was that type of thing, so that we can then funnel to the appropriate school.
That's amazing. I think that's a phenomenal resource. As soon as that rolled out, I hope that all the high school and middle school kids are really educated on how to use it, how to navigate it. It's like the one thing I actually want on my kids' phones.
So there are training protocols that come with the program that we'll be rolling out once we, you know, have it set up. Anyone in the district, student or parent, is able to download the app to their phone. So we've heard from districts who are using it, game changer is the word they used. So we're hopeful that it'll be really helpful for our community as well.
Thank you. Rachel, you and I have had conversations about educating the students with regard to knowing who they can speak to when they feel like themselves are in trouble. So collectively, we have identified that as an area that needs to be improved. And we're trying to, you know, give students the resources they need to communicate with people when they're not feeling
No,
right.
absolutely. And the bar is so low. You don't have to walk. Nobody sees you walking in the guidance and talk. It's amazing.
We've been working on that as well.
Thank you.
I want to thank you for taking charge of this. It is very much needed in the district. So happy to see there's a lot of support. My question was on the student athlete program. What exactly will that be, and how are coaches involved? I know this has been a big thing for me to keep communicating about. Because I think it's a really, I'd like to look at it more as an opportunity to connect with kids in a different, less pressure situation, you know, from academics. As the coaches to see kids at a different level and connect with them at a different level. And I've seen it happen in amazing ways, and I've seen it happen in terrible ways. So that's a big, like, how do we get, you know, to a great place there?
So we are in the very beginning stages of planning that, but our idea right now, our vision, is to have 3 student sessions for each season of athletics, and to have presentations to the student athletes about, you know, mindsets and ideas that pertain to student athletes, especially related to mental health, that maybe we need to challenge or work through, and then also ways that students can connect with help in various ways. There will be, again, 3 sessions for coaches as well, targeting a lot of the same topics, but also targeting things around coaching styles and things that may be beneficial to students, and things that maybe you do because it's the way you were coached, but maybe it's not the best way to address situations anymore moving forward. And then also some session for parents to come and hear about some of the things that are particularly salient for student athletes that might be a little bit different than, some of the demands placed on student athletes and some of the, viewpoints of student athletes that might be different for other students.
I think that's great. And one thing I just wanted to mention is that I think there's a culture of students and parents afraid to speak up, and that there will be retribution, whether it be playing time or, whatever it might be. Just keep that in the back of your mind, and how, I guess, we're talking, like, what are their options if they're upset about something or I always direct my kids, and when I'm supposed to talk to our kids, is just to ask for feedback. How could I do that? There's definitely, situations where parents are afraid to, raise a concern for retribution on a sibling athlete or whatever it is. And that culture concerns me. And I think it concerns a lot of parents. So I'm kind of being an advocate for that because I get a lot of chatter from parents on the sidelines. And so just make sure that's
Absolutely.
Thank you. Okay. I don't even know if this is a question or just a concern, but I am impressed by the Tier 1 resources in the school. My concern as someone who works in mental health and social work is that the Tier 2 and 3 is so overwhelmed. The wait lists, the nobody takes insurance, the difficulty with access, even for someone like me who works in the field and is educated on it, is so problematic that I am wondering if the schools, the districts can do more to balance the fact that it looks nice on a chart that there are these supports, but in actuality, access and availability to these supports isn't happening regularly. So is it the district's responsibility to then hold space for these families who are trying to get help and can't? That's probably another Facebook argument, I'm sure. But my concern as a parent and a mental health provider is that there is a gap in what is happening on paper and in theory what should be happening and in what's available to parents who, even when they know and are trying to get help. I mean, the wait lists alone, we no longer take your insurance, we're out of network, all of these things. And then it's like, people give up, or they're just like, I tried, and the school said, well, this is what we can do, we don't offer this support here. So then what? And I know it's like, well, it's not the school's problem, but it is the school's problem when children spend most of their time at school. So, again, I don't know if that's a question.
Right. And I get your concern. I get it. So, in terms of Tier 2 and Tier 3 services that we can provide at school, there are practical and logistical barriers to providing expansive amounts of services. First of all, just finding clinicians. When we started Tier 2 counseling with ESS last year, it took them months to fill their clinical position spots because there just weren't an abundance of clinicians available who wanted to take that job. So YMCA has been experiencing the same difficulties, finding clinicians that they can bring into our programs. So that is always, just a challenge for us. And then we're constantly looking at ways, I just had a conversation with someone this morning about different ways that we can bring mental health clinicians into the schools to do more Tier 2 and or Tier 3 level service. We're also, working with our own staff about getting better about that warm handoff piece. That it is no longer enough to give a family a list of phone numbers and say, here's who we recommend. That there really has to be a little bit more legwork in helping families connect with those services and making sure a connection of some kind is made. So that's another way we've been kind of flexing the use of our ESS clinicians. So typically, they would only assess students who were appropriate for their level of services and then either bring the students into their services or at that point make a connection for a family to a community provider. What they've been doing for us in the last 6 weeks is even students who we already know aren't appropriate for the level of care they provide in school, they are still meeting with those families, assessing the student's level of need, and then doing that warm handoff to a community provider. I'm sure, as you know and you can appreciate, there are oftentimes other barriers that get in the way. So sometimes even with all of the best work on that warm handoff, the connection still doesn't happen. And you're right, those students still come to school. And we still have to, figure out how to meet those needs. But we are trying to be creative in the resources that we have in terms of, figuring out ways to help families and help students get access to the care that they need.
It should be noted that we're continuously exploring grant opportunities that'll help us, strengthen and bolster these areas.
Grant opportunities, there are all different types of funding streams now coming out of the federal government, the state government, so programs are popping up all over the place. Agencies that we already work with are getting additional grant funds to run different types of programs. So we are trying to explore every opportunity that we see to see what will work and what we can bring in to meet the needs of our students in different ways. And certainly if anybody in any of your paths of lives see something, feel free to email me, reach out to me, because I'm more than willing to explore different things that we can bring in for our students.
Thank you.
Of course. Any other?
I know that concern, and that too, I've heard parents struggling to get outside services. I think the Y is filling some of that gap from what I've heard. And, it just is easier if it's at the school instead of having to cart your kid one more place. So I wanted to give that feedback too. One concern I had is I saw a news article last week saying that the state was proposing to redirect mental health funding to regional centers away from the school districts, which, one, it doesn't make a lot of sense because the schools can see what's happening with their kids and are better connected with the dynamics that they're experiencing every day. So I wanted to get your feedback on what you see as happening with that. It was also, they had a really ambitious time frame of switching this by next fall. So I wonder if you could comment on it and where you see it going.
I have a strong opinion on that, but I have to preface it by saying that I am biased. I worked for school-based youth service programs for many years, so I'm partial to those types of programs. For those of you who aren't aware, in the early 80s, the state started to give grants to collaborations between school districts and partner agencies, whether it be a hospital or a community mental health agency, to bring mental health and medical services directly into the school. The charge was things like mental health services, teen pregnancy prevention, substance use prevention. There were a couple of different areas that the programs had to target. And it started with just districts that were considered ABIT districts, but then the program grew over 20, 30 years, and currently there are 90 centers throughout the state. Some local districts, Keensburg, Long Branch, Asbury Park, have those services. I worked in one in Highland Park for years. Piscataway has one. So these are literally programs within the school. Usually they'll be set up in like an office suite, and they'll be, Red Bank Regional has one, The Source, which many of you might be aware of or have heard of. So these are set up right in the school. So the idea is it removes all the barriers and obstacles to students accessing a variety of different kinds of services, because the services are available for free during the school day at their school site. And some of these programs, like The Source and Red Bank, have partnered with their school district to even have additional funding streams, and they have really expansive programming. Now, what the state is proposing is that they stop funding those programs entirely, and that they redirect that funding to regional hubs. So the regional hub for Monmouth County would be in Freehold, and those same types of services would be available to students, but through a centralized location in Freehold. So the opposition, the school-based people are saying, how does that even make sense? If my student lives in Red Bank and goes to school at Red Bank Regional and is accessing all of these services at Red Bank Regional, and now I'm going to have to go to Freehold to access those services, it really doesn't make sense. And I guess the state's argument is that the redirection of funding will allow them to push out more services out of these hubs into schools. But for people who've had these programs in their school for decades now, They really just can't see how that would be more beneficial to their schools than what they already have.
So that doesn't affect our district then?
Well, we would be able to access the regional hub, but we don't currently have a school-based youth service program.
Right,
No.
so we maintain our current state funding for all the structures that you developed and are putting in place?
The school-based funding is not through the Department of Ed. It's through what used to be the Department of Human Services, but now comes through the Department of Children and Families. So that funding is separate than anything related to the Department of Ed or municipal taxes or anything like that. So potentially, we actually could benefit from the reorganization because we don't currently have school-based. However, I feel strongly for the districts that have school-based that would lose all that funding and programming. So, I guess we'll see. Apparently, they tried to change this about 2 years ago and it didn't go through, so we'll see if it goes through this time.
Yeah, it was just kind of confusing with all the languages.
How do they determine which districts get a school-based program? Is that something?
So originally, it was Abbott districts. Then it went by what was used to be called district factor grouping. So based on a number of demographic, statistical things for your district, you were given a alphabetical code. So there were districts like A, districts that were B, districts that were D, and they would try to do, the grant would open every 2 years, and they would try and do regional grants, north, central, south, based on district factor groups, so that they had a representation of all districts across the state receiving this grant money. And the programs looked similar but different throughout the state, depending on if the school district was awarded the grant or a partner agency was awarded the grant that then partnered with the local school district. So like in Keensburg was awarded the grant, and then they partnered with the Mental Health Association or the YMCA to bring in programming. Other places, like say Jersey City Medical Center received the grant, and then they partnered with the school district and pushed in their programming. So it really looked different depending on what site you were at. Was there another question back there?
I had a question. You mentioned grief group being formed at High School North. Can you just expand on that a little bit?
Sure. So, we've really felt strongly, we had counselors, district traumatic event response team counselors, Middletown North's own counselors from the Traumatic Loss Coalition on site at Middletown North for 5 days. And then we felt strongly that there were some students who might have ongoing needs related to the loss in the next couple of months. So we partnered with the Mental Health Association to co-facilitate a grief group, which will be a very structured 6-session group based on the curriculum written by a woman named Maureen Underwood. She's a licensed clinical social worker. She wrote the Lifelines curriculum, and the curriculum is called Growing On After Loss. So GOALS is the acronym, and it really focuses on post-traumatic growth for students who are in a grieving process. So they will start at the end of October, and it'll be about 2 sessions a month for 6 total sessions, and then we'll reevaluate the need.
And do they already have students identified for this, or does someone ask to be included?
So there are a list of identified students that we are working through to determine, because the students have to consent for participation in the group and their parents have to consent for participation in the group. But if you have a student or know of a student that you think might benefit, I would call the student's guidance counselor or have the parent of that student call their guidance counselor and just inquire about the groups.
And are they pulled out of class? Is it after school?
We're doing it during advisory.
Thank you. And also, is this presentation going to be available on the district website or email to us?
We're going to discuss that in Stockhausen. I also want to note that Dr. Young is going to be presenting not at October's board meeting, we're thinking November. This is a presentation that would really benefit the entire community. This is such a small group, and obviously you're going to turnkey this to your PFA, but we feel like getting this out to a broader population is going to be important. So we'll talk about it being on the website. I might wait to do it until after the board meeting. We can talk about it just because I would like a nice turnout for that. It will be available online also. The presentation will be virtual, but we'll discuss it.
Thank
initiated, but through the school counselor. So if you have a concern about your child, or you have another parent in your community who has a concern about their child, I would encourage them to call their school counselor, discuss the concern. You can say you're aware of Tier 2 services through Effective School Solutions, and would the child be appropriate, and if so, if a referral could be made.
And I think related to that, if somebody is involved in a case of bullying, is there any referral related to that? Or is there any kind of connection to a Tier 2 referral that relates to somebody who's involved in ongoing bullying?
So if a student is identified as the bully or the victim, do they automatically get referred? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, is there any type of connection? Like, are you watching those students who are involved in some kind of situation?
Any staff member that becomes aware of the potential of a bullying incident needs to report that to the principal immediately, and then the investigation needs to be initiated within 24 hours. So
That's related to
I think that's what you're asking. Would they know about that prior? I guess I'm asking, are they uncovering that during a Tier 2 session?
My question is, are you then, so you're gonna look into bullying, right? If somebody says it's happening,
Correct.
whatever that happens, and then
Correct.
you go into the whole HIB process?
Correct.
My question is, how does that then relate to the mental health services and the Tier 2 type of intervention stuff, where you might have a student who hasn't been identified for any other reason, but is, involved in something?
I think this is what you're asking. If a victim is identified through a HIB investigation or an allegation, what's the follow-up with those students who are the victims? I think that's what you're asking?
Right.
And that, you go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, so I wouldn't say that there's like a hard and fast rule beyond that. If a student has been identified as being involved in an actionable HIB 3 times in 1 school year, correct? They now have to have a plan in place. So that plan has to be put in place by the school, which may involve some level of counseling or support services. But I would say these situations are all so different and nuanced that I wouldn't say every single time that there's a HIB investigation, is there a referral to counseling? No. Sometimes yes, and sometimes those situations are, both things can be happening independent of each other. They're not always interrelated. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I want to touch on 2 other things as well. So new pieces of the HIB law require anyone who is an offender of a confirmed HIB, that documentation is placed in the student's file and follows them through their academic career in Middletown, or if they transfer to another district. I also wanted to clarify that, because you made the point earlier, once someone says bullying occurs, we do investigate it. The state does give school districts the option to decide at an administrative level whether they're going to pursue it as a HIB investigation, but the district in Middletown has decided in their policy that we are going to investigate all alleged incidents. So those are 2 pieces that are fairly new.
I think my main concern is, are you checking on those kids that they're okay?
The victims.
The victim and the
both.
bully and the victim obviously both have an issue. So is somebody checking that they're okay?
I don't want to say that those individuals who are necessarily the offenders have a target on their back, but as the administrative and counseling team in a building, you are aware of the incidents that occur, and you do have the pulse on your building, and you do not necessarily follow students who have had issues before, because everyone makes mistakes, right? Children make mistakes, but you're aware as an administrative and counseling team of what has occurred in your building and what you need to keep an eye on for.
So I know, some you go through the investigation, some things are not considered HIB, and a child might feel like they're being bullied, and there's meanness, like you said, especially middle school, early high school level, you see that feeling left out, right? There's a lot that kind of goes into that mentality. What happens, even if it is considered a HIB or bullying incident, or if it's just this general meanness, is there anything done as far as conflict resolution? And I ask this because a couple of scenarios that I've heard about, talked about with some parents, those kids were individually them how to sort of work through these situations. So I was just curious what happened there, whether it's a him or not.
So again, we don't have any formal structure for that. Years ago, we used to have peer mediator programs, but honestly, we had so few students joining those programs that they kind of disbanded over time in favor of programs that students were wanting to initiate more of. And again, those situations are nuanced and happen at differently in different buildings. So sometimes there are opportunities for conflict resolution. Sometimes one or both students will say, I don't want to sit down in a room together. To quote Mr. Smith, he used to always tell people they had to learn to peacefully coexist, right? So sometimes it's just a matter of talking to the students individually and kind of recognizing that even if you don't want to sit down and resolve this with the other student, you need to figure out ways, and adults are around to support you.
But I guess that's the question, why wouldn't that be, I feel like that's a situation where it should be.
We do try to
they
facilitate
have
that
to
when
agree to
possible.
it, So they all have to agree to it in order to sit down?
And parents need to be made aware, and it would be determined by the situation and the incident itself, and whether it's appropriate to put those individuals together at the time. But we like to get, as a building principal, I always like to get parent consent, and obviously both parties or whatever parties are involved need to be okay with that meeting.
It's unfortunate, it's just, you just see certain situations where like, you just get in the room and talk it out. It's a good skill to learn.
Sometimes students do want to do that, and when they are both willing participants, we have counselors who do engage in that type of dialogue with students. But oftentimes we also have students, one or both, who will say, like, I don't want to sit down together. I'm not comfortable sitting down together. My parent doesn't want me to sit down with this individual. So we have to respect those, boundaries that the students have for themselves. So it can be, difficult to navigate sometimes.
I wanted to touch really quickly, now we're talking about HIB on the consequence piece, because I know there's been some questions about that. I would encourage everyone to look at the code of conduct, because whether or not it's a founded HIB or not, there's often still consequences associated, because it is a violation of one aspect, if not two or three, of the code of conduct. So we are implementing restorative practice when possible, but we're trying to combine that with punitive discipline when appropriate. So we're trying to do a combination of both, but some people feel like if it's not a confirmed HIB, that nothing was done, but that's not necessarily the case. You just have to look at the code of conduct and see where it aligns with the problem that occurred.
I feel like what I might be missing, or maybe it's because it might be missing, is like the parent piece, the parent education, the parent buy-in, because if we don't have parent buy-in, there are so many additional barriers to, like, you can only do so much without parent consent and parent involvement. This is a huge thing, there's tons of research on it. But I would also say, like, as a parent who is also educated on this stuff, like, all of this is really important. I know you said you were going to talk about how it's disseminated to parents, but like, there should be, in my mind, it has to be presented to parents in a way where parents do not feel defensive or like there's going to be retribution. A lot of people feel like it's an adversarial situation, and then, but like, there's social learning theory about behavior and modeling and reinforcement and all that stuff that exists. So like, you could only do so much in the school with the kid in the incident. If you have a parent over here who's like a bully, or who is, kind of unraveling what's trying to happen, then it doesn't even matter. It's a waste of time and resources. So like, from my stance, I feel like making sure there's a parent education piece, better communication. Absolutely nobody goes on the district website in this virtual backpack. Like, nobody does that. I'm sorry. But like, how are we communicating with parents? I went to back to school night. I didn't see anything on mental health. I saw nothing. I met the teachers. This is what we're going to be doing as far as the curriculum, and that was it. Like, so, my kids are in elementary school. Maybe it was different at the high school level, but why? Kids need this stuff. Parents, they need to know, like, what's available, how they can be, empowered to be involved. So, I don't know. I just feel like could all sit here and be like, oh, this is so amazing, but if I can turn kids to the PTO too, that doesn't mean that it's reaching.
No, and I think that's a challenge that we're always facing.
Yeah.
And we appreciate that. I think these are really proactive steps.
Yeah.
I think the district is doing a great job moving in the right direction. But to your point, listen, it's hard to get people to a PFA meeting. Yeah. It's hard to get people involved. And that's why we have groups like this. So you can start to get the message out to people. And we need to look for better avenues to communicate this out as well. And get people at board meetings. That's why I said, of course we're going to put this on the district website. But I'm afraid if we do that, then we lose 50 people. I would like to get a captive crowd so we can have these conversations. And we've expanded our parent presentations. They're not all that well attended. And we need to work on getting people, because we've got a great suicide prevention program coming up in November, and we would like to have that well attended. It's just a matter of getting that information out to the public. But your point is well taken.
Certainly, and if any member of PIC has suggestions about how we can get parents more involved, more empowered, better communication, certainly we're open to suggestions.
I have a suggestion about that. I don't know if you're willing to come to our PTA, PTO, PFA meetings, but I think we'd all be very welcoming of any type of presentation like this. I think
this is my concern. I think it would be great to have Dr. Young in person, but there's 16 schools and she's got 2 children.
Right. I mean, I don't know who you can send.
Right.
But if we advertised that this was going to happen at our PTA meeting, parents would come out because parents are very concerned, and they would. I think
perhaps outside of a board meeting, we do a special presentation, and we invite all of the different parent groups.
Yeah, I think board meetings are a little bit like intimidating for some people because you're like, oh, they're right, like they're so long, and like I just don't think I can do it. So. Or I'll listen to it.
You're the suicide piece. You
Right.
don't want to go for
I know
two-hour
you're
boards.
you're trying really hard.
I think Mr. Kirkpatrick and I can work on a way to maybe tag this on to one of our parent nights that we have coming up this winter. We plan to do it in the spring, but maybe that's waiting too long. We plan to do it at a Board of Ed meeting. There's different ways, but I mean, 16 schools would be a lot to attend 16 PTA meetings.
What if you recorded something and we played it? Like, if you edit this, not like, if you edit this a little bit and record it.
They could create like a nice
Well,
little
it's being recorded, actually. This whole discussion, by the way, that's why Chris, the magic man Rotolo, is actually here. He every PIC meeting, every PAC meeting is recorded. Starting to get, while Dr. George is still here. So
Yeah,
you
which
can
I think
actually
is
find
great.
it, you can actually go ahead and share any aspect of this recording right now with your parent groups.
But that's a good idea to maybe just record the presentation part as well.
And if we advertise it, I really think,
That's a good idea.
I think we would get more interest from parents who are just, they don't think they're coming out just to
Right.
buy something.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Going behind you first.
As a suggestion, you can take just a snippet of her presentation. You can provide us with the link, and we can share it at PFA meetings, we can share it on Facebook pages, because honestly, at the high school level, you're not gonna get a lot of people to come to the meeting. There's 6 people at a PFA meeting, it doesn't matter what I advertise. But if I put this on Facebook with a link, people will look at it. They're lazy, I don't know what else to say, but they are.
Yeah, it's
They'll all
really
talk
hard.
a good game and argue that they all want to be involved, but not everybody's going to come. So that's just a suggestion. If you could just isolate the supporting.
I also think we need to help tidbits, even tips, like how to talk to your teenager, like just like little, blips, right? Like, hey, did you know when you drive a carpool, if you stay silent, that you hear a lot? Like, you know what I mean? Like, there's just lots of parents.
We've also started to utilize the school newsletter, which a lot of people probably aren't looking at, to your point. But now every time a newsletter goes out, we've included a mental health piece in it. So we need to start pushing that out maybe a little more effectively.
I was just going to say having the individual school counselors do something like this at every school would probably be helpful. I mean, I go to PTO meetings every month. My principal will say these things, but I think having it come from someone other than the principal, but actually having the person that you need to talk to present, I think that's important too. I know who the school counselor is in my building, but other than that, I don't really have much FaceTime with her. So I think FaceTime with these people is important too on the individual school level.
Good point.
That was actually what I was going to say. Our PTA has talked about doing that, having our counselor at school come out and speak to the parents, because unless you've had a run-in or they don't really know the counselor, I don't been years in the school. I don't really know Mrs. Richardson well at New Monmouth. So for her to come out and speak and maybe give your presentation or something, that would be great.
Right.
I mean, we can set it up on our own, but maybe to have each counselor at every school go out and do that.
I was just gonna put on your radar too, group work we know can be a source of pain for kids, especially, those with disabilities who might be misunderstood. So, trying to combine some of this SEL with group work and how do you better collaborate with each other, work with each other, resolve conflicts would be a great idea too.
So some of those skills are part of the positive action curriculum, because remember, it comes back to those core competencies and the benchmarks, which social awareness, which is related to group work, relationship skills, your own self-awareness and ability to self-regulate around things that are making you nervous or uncomfortable. So all of the skills taught through the positive action program will relate back to some of these issues related to group work or peer conflict and how to work through that and those types of things.
Sorry, one more thing.
That's okay.
I've said this before, but have you ever considered getting peer leaders involved in the peer interaction bit of this? I know you said if you've had groups before, there was no interest. I feel like in the middle schools and probably the high schools, they might be a good resource to maybe start or just to talk to about how maybe you break into that level of comfort with kids their age.
So when we ran peer mediators programs in the past, and I assume it would be the same now, there's really specific, I don't want to say curricula, but there's really specific programming that the students get trained on how to mediate conflicts. So peer leaders kind of has a separate mission, but I hear what you're saying. The peer leaders might be students who would be like a captive audience for some of this additional training if we were to go that route. It would be something to consider.
Like I talked to my daughter about like a lunch bunch where maybe you invite students at lunch to come sit in the library who aren't comfortable there, going to the cafeteria, and then maybe being around other students who have that same feeling just might be helpful. If you
Dr.
were to-
Young is meeting with our counselors pretty regularly now, and those are ideas that we can discuss. Many schools have started mentoring programs, which is sort of what you're discussing, but I think...
Or lunch bunches.
Right, which are occurring in all the elementary schools.
I feel like you just need to frame it that it's not like a peer mental health group.
Right.
I know it's tricky, but I know that my daughter would be interested in, and her other, honor society, like we always use them for like tutoring and different things, but I feel like those types of leaders would probably really want to help in these situations.
The only unfortunate thing about using peer leaders is peer leaders are usually the busiest kids in the school. They're trying to do every single thing. But your point is valid. Anything else? Any other questions, concerns? All right, well, my email is here. Please, at any time, feel free to reach out if you have a specific question, concern, you see a resource that you'd like us to explore, please feel free to email me.
Thank you.
Okay, then we'll move on to Mrs. Alphone for the explanation of our next piece, which are our PAC meetings, first of which will be next month.
Yes, so Parent Advisory Council, a little bit different than PIC. So our Parent Advisory Council is really the stakeholder group that informs our spending of federal funds. So in Middletown, we receive 5 titles worth of federal funds, 1 through 5. Title 1 is based on socioeconomic status. We currently have 8 Title I schools in the district. We have Title II, which is a professional development fund. Currently, we use the majority of those funds for a class size reduction teacher at one of our elementary schools, which is an allowable charge as an expense. Title III, which is for our ESL program, our English as a second language learner population. As you know or may not know, we do have a magnet program because of our size challenges. Back probably 6 or 7 years ago, we decided to put into place a magnet school program where we would have our identified ESL learners come together to be educated in a specific number of buildings. It just allowed for the more efficient and effective delivery of services. And we also have a magnet at our elementary, 3 magnets at our elementary, 1 at our middle school, and 1 at our high school level. We also have received Title IV funds, which is Extraordinary Educational Opportunities. That is probably the most flexible fund we have. A lot of times that gets used for our accelerated learning opportunities, our gifted and talented populations, any kind of accelerated coursework, STEM. So most of those funds in Title IV are used for those purposes. And then Title V, which will be a new grant title that we're going for next year, is a Perkins grant, and it's based on career and technical education. This year, for the first time, we've established our first CTE pathway. It is a business pathway, and now that we have that established course sequence at our high school, we'll be eligible to apply for Perkins 5 funding for the next school year. And we're looking to continue to grow those programs. Currently, we're investigating a culinary arts CTE pathway to be more in the career and technical education realm, where business is still a more academic traditional path. So we're looking to expand other opportunities outside in that career and technical world. So the goal of PAC is, when you have all of these title funds, you are required by federal regulation to have stakeholder groups that inform decision-making regarding the spending of this money. So while many of you serve on both committees, they do have two distinct and separate functions. So our first meeting will be just a high-level overview of currently how we're spending our title funds. Then during the course of the other meetings that are for the remainder of the year, we'll talk about planning forward for next year. So our application for federal monies, now application meaning how we're going to spend that money, we're automatically, as a public agency, given an award under those titles, which is based on our demographics. So when we apply for the grant, we're really applying for exception by the state of how we're going to spend that money, because it does fall under federal uses and allowable expenses. So we have to make sure that we are, in those title funds, spending over and above the district allocation. There's language called supplement supplant. We are not allowed to take federal monies and replace anything in our operating budget. Anything we spend with federal funds, we have to spend over and above whatever the monetary budget for the district is. So with that comes some decision making as to how we're going to supplement the programming that we already provide to our students in Middletown, which is where the PAC comes in, because it is a stakeholder group representative of all of the constituents in the district. So we look for a representative from each school. Certainly with that, we're going to capture all of our Title I identified schools. We look for representation from our magnet schools. We look for students, families who may be a part of our ESL programming. So that way we do have stakeholders that have direct involvement with their students in some of the ways that these federal monies are spent, and certainly tied to the benefit for our students. So we'll have that process happen again, planning forward for next year. Our application is typically due by July 1. We receive our allocations every year. It's a little bit different. We hope by April. We often get by June, depending on how quickly the federal government moves. It's been a little slower because of certainly all of the ESSER and CARES Act funding we've been receiving, because that's tied up in the federal government as well. So this has kind of been a delayed cycle. So we have that opportunity every year to kind of plan forward, and that's part of what this group's work will be. We also look to invite community members in the business world or in private organizations that can help to grow and provide ideas and relationships for our career and technical education programs. So those are the main functions of PAC. I have the list of people that were involved last year. I'm going to reach out to those individuals to see if they still want to be the representative for their school and a part of the committee. And then certainly we'll see what other buildings we have left to be represented, and we'll reach out to principals to see if they can offer suggestions on individuals who may be interested on serving. So, and we'll also give you a kind of high-level overviews of some of this work in action during the course of the year, and that usually is our last meeting of the year. Any questions?
It's not actually about what PAC is specifically. I'm just wondering, I know when we switched to this PIC-PAC alternating model, we basically reduced the PIC meetings to 4 meetings a year from what had been 8.
Right.
I understand the need for PAC to happen 4 times a year. Is there a way to have the PAC meetings have a PIC component where we have still other topics presented or discussed, or if we have PIC-related questions, that they get addressed at those meetings, so we're not waiting 2 months between each PIC meeting? Sorry.
I mean, we technically have to have 2 separate meetings in the sense of PAC is a requirement by the federal government. It really has to be federal fund-related topics. So I don't know, maybe there's a way to buddy those meetings together, and it depends, like, is it, there's a, right.
Just a split. I mean,
Right,
it's like,
just a
okay,
split.
PAC is at 9:15, or PIC is at 9:15,
Right,
PAC
right.
is at 10:30, I don't know.
Right,
I
maybe
just feel
putting them
we,
on,
as
like-
a group, PIC has lost its kind of ability to be quick to respond or ask questions, because sometimes you might have to wait 2 months before your PIC topic can come to the agenda.
Right.
So I know that's not specific to the PAC stuff. I think
Right,
PAC
but the,
stuff has to happen
and a
together.
PIC question would definitely not be appropriate during a PAC meeting, because
Yeah.
they're totally separate functions. I think it got a little confusing because the titles are very similar. And also, a lot of you represent for both.
Yeah.
So, you know.
Well, I think the way, obviously, it was presented to us, and I know you weren't here at this point, it was between, you know, when you were,
In between.
you're a little busy over there, yeah.
Little hiatus.
It was like, PIC is now PAC also. Like, I don't feel like I ever fully, like, signed up for PAC. It was like, oh, you're coming every month, so now it's PAC on these days and PIC on these days.
Yeah.
And it kind of took me a couple meetings, honestly, to even really understand what the difference was. And I just feel like my PIC identity misses PIC once a month.
Right. So, I don't know how the group was created at the inception, but the biggest thing with the PAC committee is that it has to be representative of the groups reflected in the federal funding, which is why if you just purely took PIC, you may not have that representation, which is why you probably had some additional members come when it was PAC, or at least we invited them to come. So that's kind of where the line is drawn, in that when you have a PAC committee, it has to be representative of those stakeholder groups that are reflected in the methods that you're spending that federal money with, because they're informing that decision making.
Which, if any of these titles is involved with special education?
None of them. None of these are special education.
Right, I heard, but so. is
That
there
would
no
be like
federal
our
money, or-
IDEA grant, which is
Okay.
handled by our special services director, which is a separate funding stream.
Got it. I want to be on those meetings.
So, but that's kind of PAC in a nutshell. And I mean, I guess further discussions can be had about how we structure them, so that way, you know, you get the benefit of both committees for the different purposes that they have.
See, the only complication becomes time commitment. You know, I mean, if a PAC meeting is going to be routinely as much as an hour to 2 hours long, and then you try to have a PIC component, which in itself could be easily another hour.
Well, I guess we're here. I dedicate every morning to going till 12 o'clock. And I just feel like we have PIC's capabilities by having the meeting times. And I feel like when we have a group of people who are willing to come and have questions, and I feel like every PIC meeting has always been a good discussion. And I think we learn from you guys, we bring stuff to you guys that you may not have known, you guys meeting administration. I just feel like when we stepped to this PIC versus PAC or PIC and PAC model, it just diluted PIC's value last year. So I just want, if there's a way to remedy that, and I know PAC still needs to happen on the dates that's on the calendar, do we try to add a PIC component? If people are willing to come and stay until noon, is the district willing to have us here, I guess?
And that's definitely something we can bring forward to Mary Ellen. I mean, she's ultimately the decision maker on that, but, you know, certainly we see your points, and, you know.
And honestly, everybody, if you feel differently, please feel free to say differently. I don't want to speak for everybody. I feel like PIC, we're losing a little bit with PIC by having them.
Well, I think to piggyback on that, there's a lot of schools within the district, and not all of them receive title funding. So is it the right breakup to have just automatically this whole group be on the PAC committee if their school is not affected by?
So everybody is affected by,
Everybody is,
yeah.
okay.
So the only fund sources that are not affected by everyone are Title I and III. Everyone's impacted by 2, because it's
Okay.
professional development, and everybody's impacted by 4. 5, Perkins, that's a high school situation, so the 2 high schools are impacted by that, but the other 2, 2 out of the 4 majors, I say Perkins 5 is a minor, because we haven't technically received money yet. We're in the process of growing our program to receive. So out of the 4 titles, 2 are impactful to every building in some way, shape, or form. So, but still, I mean, you know, whether, how much it impacts your building is going to be relevant and based on your building dynamics and the needs of those buildings in any given year.
I do want to kind of piggyback on what Rachel said, because we met with such a huge district, and this is our only opportunity to all come together to kind of deny the whole community that obligation that we kind of have to our schools, cutting it down from 8 to 4. There are times that I get questions and I'm like, oh, I have a meeting next month, and the next PTA meeting comes, that's 3 weeks away, and our next meeting is like 5 weeks away. So there's always like a lapse. I just think that I kind of liked it last year. I mean, the meetings were long, but we had like a little intermission. People came in, people left when they had to leave. I felt like it was a productive way of doing things. Did I like staying here until noon? I mean, I don't think anyone loved it, but I felt like we all walked away and we had everything we needed to report back to our school. I mean, I learned more in a meeting than I probably learned ever just watching a video, to be quite honest. I like the discussions and stuff.
So also, like I said, that it was one of the goals for our strategic planning process was trying to increase opportunities for parent participation, because, I mean, at a board meeting, it's limited to your 3 minutes and it's not a conversation, whereas here you can have a little bit of a back and forth at least and get things clarified and, you know, more information at least. And that's valuable.
We'll bring these concerns back to Mrs. Walker.
Okay, well, thank you very much. If there's no more questions for Mrs. Alphone, Heather, Dr. Sappert will give us our Middletown Friends of Diverse Learners update.
Okay, so one, I messed up our links on our flyer. And so we now have a new flyer to distribute, and I think Chris, I sent something to Chris about it yesterday. So hopefully this will work for the rest of the year. But just wanted to get that out and apologize for that. And I am on some of the Facebook pages, so I can easily share to some of your pages, but some of the other ones I just can't get to. So if there's a way to get on there, I could share easily if you make me a member. Otherwise, you know, if somebody could, you know, help us get the word out about our meeting each month, we'd really appreciate that. The other thing that we put out recently is a parent survey, because we know, you know, there's like 1,900 students in our district who are either on 504s or IEPs, and yet we see a small fraction of that at our meetings. Again, it's hard to get people out. So, and it's hard to connect to them because it's, you know, confidential as to who's who. So, the more PTAs can help, you know, the better off we are in terms of being able to give, you know, productive feedback to the district and, you know, and representative of all the different schools. The other thing is we have coming up in November is a presentation on executive functioning skills. So this is November 14th, and yes, I accidentally got my son's math homework in the printer somehow. It's going to be by Dr. Harrison, who teaches special education teachers up at Rutgers Graduate School. She also does research on the topic and has experience as a public school teacher and as a parent. So she has a really great background to bring. And just so that you guys are aware about executive functioning skills, for those who might not be, and for those who know a lot more, feel free to correct me here. They are the mental processes that enable us to plan and organize, manage our time and emotions, and initiate and complete tasks. So these skills are kind of like your brain CEO that directs your thoughts and actions. And the CEO typically takes till our mid-20s to fully develop. So it's, you know, it helps us understand why some of our teenagers don't think long-term, because their brain doesn't always operate that way, or is in the process of learning how to do that. And not all of our kids develop these skills naturally, or they might have injury that affect this, and help is needed to help train the brain to develop these skills and learn how to manage their deficits. So sadly, some of these kids can be misjudged though as being lazy or careless or disrespectful, when really they just need help learning basic skills. You know, it's a kid who, you know, interrupts class because they don't have the impulse control yet to, you know, and they need to learn how to do that. And as a parent or even a parent, it's hard to help them sometimes because it's easier just to do it for them. And, you know, we really need to get these kids independent and learning some things that may be more difficult for them. So the presentation is going to focus on how do you do this through evidence-based interventions both at home and at school. And Dr. Harrison will discuss the basics of EF and the role in independent functioning by a discussion of various interventions and how to overcome these challenges, and including recommendations for IEPs and 504s, and she'll be able to answer parents' questions. So if you could, you know, help get the word out, we'd really appreciate that. We're also planning on another event in the spring about behavioral challenges, and we have a meeting coming up this Thursday night. So please encourage parents to attend. We're holding them virtually because we get better attendance, and it's easier for people to, you know, connect for an hour. And, you know, so if you could just help get the word out, we'd appreciate it.
How do you connect it? Like how do you, like if you could put it on our
Yep. So there's an RSVP and there's a meeting link on our flyers, which now work. Because the other links had expired actually. So yeah, so if we have our information on Facebook too that you can connect with, and then I also shared them with Margie on the agenda as much as I could.
I can definitely get them out to everybody after the meetings, the correct ones.
Yeah, I'd appreciate it if you could. Thanks.
And Heather, you can give us your contact information too in there, and that way if you want to reach out to Heather to be a member, friend, whatever, I'm here.
Yeah, we're a very open, fluid group, so
That'd be awesome.
we understand parents are busy, so they can come, you know, when it works for them.
Heather, when did you say that presentation is that you were just talking about?
The presentation is November 14th. It's a Monday right after the holiday.
Okay. Well, that wraps up this portion of the meeting. As you can see at the bottom of the agenda, the upcoming dates for both Pick and Pack are noted. You see we have no meeting in December. That was a tradition we started several years ago, but we always entertain the offer of the possibility of bringing back a December meeting. Just that it's a very busy time of year. Folks aren't necessarily ready to commit to another day in December, but I have in the past talked to Mrs. Walker about the possibility of bringing back a December meeting, which may address some of the concerns about the fact that the next meeting is January, which is quite some time from now. So if there are no other new business or old business that you'd like to bring to the table, we'll officially adjourn. Denise?
As new business, it's old business.
Okay.
Website, anything, I feel bad for Chris.
So we are working with Mr. Rotolo and Mr. Suliak, Mrs. Alfond and I. We have a meeting this week actually. We've committed to using Blackboard as our platform. We are moving in a direction that we're cleaning up all of our websites at the building level to make sure that we are in compliance. And I'm hoping, Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm hoping within the next couple months we'll be in a better place or a different place than we are now.
That is correct. We'll be building something behind the scenes while the current website is still operational. So if you don't see things happening on our website proper, don't worry, because the wheels are in motion behind the scenes, and then we will swap them out.
So maybe just recommendations to just throw out communications that there's some frustration here. And I was rolling you up again for hobby bonds, it is my background and I kind of go with parents on it now.
We appreciate it.
Thank you.
We're confident that the platform we put out there is going to be solid.
Thank you. All right, thank you to everyone for making our first meeting such a wonderful, informative success. Thank you to the admins and to the building folks who are willing to come and volunteer their time, and to the parents who are willing to come and volunteer their time. Thank you very much, and we'll see you for the PAC meeting in November.